Homer and Apu versus Much Apu About Nothing, the Great Quickie Mart Kerfuffle. Both are awesome Apu Spotlight episodes, but you can only pick one. Which is the better episode? Alright, I'm just going to address the elephant in the room. This showdown will obviously have an air of controversy hanging over it, because both of these episodes feature large hats. I've been holding off doing a video about it, kind of waiting to see how things finally shake out between the Simpsons and large hats. It's kind of like the situation with the old-timey guitars recently. Maybe we'll eventually get a clear answer on this one too. But in the meantime, let's take a look at these classic Apu Spotlight episodes. These were pretty important stories in fleshing out the background of this character, learning about what really makes him tick. One taking a more relationship-driven focus, and one taking a closer look at the big issues. As per usual, we will respect our elders and start out with the older episode first. This is the case for Homer and Apu. Okay, here's the dirty little secret about character spotlight episodes. They live and die by their relationships. Yes, they obviously need to highlight the secondary character, but given this is a show called The Simpsons, their strong bond with the Simpson family bonds them to the audience. The chemistry between these characters essentially fuels the entire story. Homer and Apu is the superior episode because, well, it has more Homer and Apu. This is the kind of story that gets straight to the point. We are going to learn about who Apu is and what motivates him, but through the lens of his evolving relationship with Homer. First poisoning Homer with tainted meat, then trying to seek karmic realignment, then going on a journey and getting fed up with him. Apu and Homer are an excellent comedic duo, and this episode takes better advantage of that. Apu will often play the straight man, bringing a more hard-working, rational presence to Homer's lazy stupidity, but it's not like Apu is a bland everyman character. He does plenty of stuff that catches Homer off guard. Like every great buddy cop film, both characters have to get used to each other. But most importantly, Apu is the one with the actual character arc here. It's his spotlight episode. Homer should just be in a supporting role. Apu really gets to internalize and work through whether he really needs the Quickie Mart, needs to think about his unethical practices, save the day in the end. In the other episode, the character arc goes to Homer instead, and Apu doesn't even show up until about the 8-minute mark. If this is supposed to be a deep dive into Apu's character, then why is he being crammed into Acts 2 and 3 only? Secondly, Homer and Apu is the better episode because there's more variety to it. Yeah, there's definitely great Homer stuff in here, but this is a story that takes Apu to many different settings. Let's take a trip to India to the first convenience store. Let's go shopping with Marge and learn the insider grocery store secrets. Oh, you want some satire? How about an investigative journalism bit with Kent Brockman? Shh, Lisa, the dog is barking. If you want to take a break from the Simpson family, Homer and Apu features a B-plot with James Woods. They don't spend a ton of time on it, just a bunch of funny little skits as a change of pace. We can do all these relationship scenes with Apu while keeping the Quickie Mart in mind so it can pay off in the finale. It's a better showman than the other episode, constantly finding new things to entertain the audience. Basically, Homer and Apu is more fun than the other episode. I mean, it has a frickin' musical number in it. How can you say the other episode has a stronger sense of fun when right here the characters are bursting into song? Homer and Apu takes itself slightly less seriously. It relishes in getting super meta about its plot structure. It'll let its act break hinge on a screw the audience joke, a joke they call back to in Act 3. Homer and Apu's jokes never feel sweaty or labored. It has a strong sense of what situations are inherently funny. It has all the hallmarks of the silly and subversive humor of Season 5. Homer and Apu's character relationship focused, combined with its masterful showmanship and killer jokes, makes it easily the better option. But I suppose, in any good democracy, we should probably hear out the other side of the debate before casting our votes. Everyone, it's time to think of the children. This is the case for Much Apu About Nothing. Much Apu About Nothing is not an episode about providing cheap thrills. I mean, I love cheap thrills, don't get me wrong, But Much Ado About Nothing is more interested in telling a complete story, actually tackle the character motivations in a substantive way. It doesn't have time for B-plots, musical numbers, and random trips to India, because its story has significantly higher stakes, like there's actual conflict that needs to be addressed. Simply put, Much Ado About Nothing is a much more meaningful Apu Spotlight episode. It does a way better job making us understand Apu's motivations. It's not a simple atonement story like in the other one. Here, he's facing down an entire system, being confronted by a community that's turned his back on him. It's kind of ironic that this is the later episode, because here's where we get his backstory, that we learn about his schooling in India, how he studied computer science under Professor Flik. We've known Apu long enough that we understand how many friends he's made in Springfield. The previous argument suggested that he does not have a real character arc, but that's untrue. He totally struggles with trying to fit in with his new environment, tries making real sacrifices. Like he becomes a Mets fan, for example. Both he and Homer get nice character arcs in Act 2, and then spend the final act trying to solve their problem. We still get plenty of hilarious interactions between these two in Act 3. It's just, this episode earns these moments more because the conflict and reconciliation are much more meaningful. In the other episode, Homer could never deliver such an impassioned speech about his friend Apu. Speaking of impassioned speeches, Much Ado About Nothing is the superior option because it uses its secondary characters better. The scope is so much bigger right here, providing so many more opportunities for secondary characters. A wandering bear causes a neighborhood panic, which forces people like Chief Wiggum and Mayor Quimby to get involved. Helen Lovejoy delivers her iconic catchphrase in this one. Barney and Moe join the angry mob protesting outside the Quickie Mart. They'll throw in this scene at Springfield Elementary. Much Ado About Nothing does an excellent job of using its cast to show the environment that Apu is up against. It feels more personal because these are characters we like. Well, most of them. The other episode is so focused on the Simpson family that whenever they cut away to someone else, it feels gimmicky and arbitrary. As a whole, Much Ado About Nothing is just more thoughtful than the other episode. It tackles an actual issue that's still being debated today, calls out politicians like Quimby, who is looking for scapegoats rather than actual solutions. It obviously presents a cynical view of the public, too, and its eagerness to accept these scapegoats. But most importantly, there's a thoughtfulness to the characters and their relationships. It's very powerful hearing Apu's story, hear about his struggles fitting in, and then seeing Homer change his mind. In the other episode, Apu says he needs the Quickie Mart, but he never exactly explains why. It's treated as something that defines him. Much Ado About Nothing puts more thought into its character motivations, actually getting at why they are the way they are. If you're doing a character spotlight, that should be the most important thing. But enough about thoughtfulness. We can think about that stuff later. Let's go to the verdict. This debate reminds me a lot of the showdown between Cape Fear and You Only Move Twice. It's the classic battle between a drunk episode and a relatively sober one. I guess this is what happens when you compare Season 5 to Oakley and Weinstein stuff. I find Homer and Apu to be much funnier than the other episode, but much more inconsistent. Homer and Apu really do make an excellent duo. Stuff like this, Homer Loves Flanders, and Homer the Smithers is a testament to what an amazing comedic foil Homer is. The funniest part of Much Ado About Nothing for me is their studying session, whereas this episode gets that dynamic for all three acts. This is a comedy. There's something to be said for sheer entertainment value. On the other hand, Homer and Apu's actual story is shockingly thin. Lots of sitting around in Act 2, a trip to India that basically exists to kill some time, and then the robber takes a shot at James Woods for no discernible reason. This is definitely the high highs and low lows contestant of this showdown. Much Ado About Nothing has stronger character writing and a legitimate satirical edge to it. The first act doesn't feature Apu directly, but is totally instrumental in setting the stage for the environment and culture. It gets into Apu's wants and needs more, breaks down how he can live in America, but still be true to his heritage. The jokes are more in the really makes you think category. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. I love cerebral jokes as much as the next guy. It's just, there's a lot of negativity and conflict in this episode, so you need some ridiculous, silly nonsense to balance things out. Much Ado About Nothing is considerably less fun, feels a little too sober for its own good. This ended up being a surprisingly close call. I ended up changing my mind about halfway through the rewatches. However, if I had to choose only one of these episodes, I would go with Much Ado About Nothing. Sobriety wins the day. At least this time it did. Even though I do appreciate Homer and Apu's sense of humor and showmanship, its story always leaves me somewhat unsatisfied. There just isn't much rising action to the plot in the second half. Its climax never feels like a proper payoff to this story. In this Showdown, I prefer the much more consistent and thoughtful Much Ado About Nothing. I really appreciate how much more this episode humanizes Apu, doesn't just treat him as that Quickie Mart guy. This is the kind of portrayal I wish we got more in the series. He feels more like a three-dimensional character in this one. Also, I shouldn't be downplaying its humor either, because it really does have a ton of iconic and memorable jokes in it. Thanks, Helen. So that's where I landed on this one. Much Ado About Nothing is the better episode. But that's just one Simpsons fan's opinion. So, as always, let me know in the comments which you prefer. I kinda expect history to repeat itself, and Homer and Apu will win the vote in a 95% landslide. Seems only appropriate. But for now, this case is closed.